The 12th of May 2021 is the 100th anniversary of the birth of Joseph Beuys, and the artist had a profound impact on art making in the second half of the 20th century. And accordingly, many exhibitions and events are taking place throughout the world exploring his legacy. And here in Dublin at the Hugh Gallery, we are organising an exhibition that will open in July, looking at his relationship with Ireland. And it'll feature the blackboards he created during a lecture he gave on the occasion of the exhibition, The Secret Block for a Secret Person in Ireland, which the gallery hosted in October 1974. Beuys's connection with Ireland was entwined with a wider interest in the Celtic world, the traces and spirit of which could be found across Europe. And in his exploration of this Celtic consciousness, Beuys frequently collaborated with Richard Demarco, whose gallery in Edinburgh hosted 8 visits by the artist to Scotland. Richard Demarco first encountered Beuys at Documenta in 1968 and would meet him in Dusseldorf in January 1970. And that visit and that meeting led to Beuys's first visit to Scotland and to the exhibition Strategy Get Arts, which featured Dusseldorf-based artists and which Richard organised at Edinburgh College of Art in 1970. And this was the beginning of a working relationship that continued until Beuys's death in 1986. And Beuys returned to Scotland many times under the auspices of the Demarco Gallery and the Edinburgh Festival and Edinburgh Arts. The latter was a series of experimental summer schools that Richard organised that took place outside the classroom, traditional classroom setting, often in the form of journeys, including journeys to Ireland. And recently I sat down with Richard on a video call and listened to his recollections of working with Joseph Beuys, particularly in relationship to their work in Scotland and Ireland, and to reflect on their long-standing friendship. And I began by asking him to give some background to the founding of his gallery in Edinburgh in 1966.
It was born out of what was called the Traverse Gallery, the Traverse Theatre Gallery, because I have had no problem in identifying what we call the visual arts with the performing arts, that is, with music, with dance, with theatre, with what is now called performance art. I don't see that visual arts should be hijacked and made a separate problem, because they do present a problem now for the simple reason that they have been appropriated entirely by the world of the marketplace, and they are therefore controlled by well, the auction house, the concept of an independent gallery as a place which sells art. I am not a seller of art. Mm-hmm. And Joseph Beuys knew that. He said to me, "Richard, you are not a dealer." And I said, "Joseph, you know I'm not a dealer. I can't stand the idea of selling art. I don't run an art shop." He said, "Of course, we are together in the world of education, using the language of art, of all the arts, not just visual art." And so he's very happy to accept my invitation to come to Scotland, not just under the aegis of the Demarco Gallery, but out of under the aegis of something I called Edinburgh Arts, all the arts. And it was under it was to focus on the importance of the Edinburgh Festival, because the Edinburgh Festival came into being in 1947 when I was 17, and the Lord Provost, or the Lord Mayor of the time, who was the chairman of the board of responsible, said, "This is in no way a commercial venture. It is about the flowering of the human spirit. My God, I realized it was part of the process of healing the human race after the pain suffered from the Second World War. That's why it came into being. Now it's unrecognizable.
And I was thinking too, not just Edinburgh Festival, but also Documenta. I mean, both were events that came out of the post-war.
Documenta.
But they came out of this post-war period, and with a spirit of kind of arts as a way of, as you say, of healing from the trauma of war. And I guess that's a theme throughout Beuys's work.
That's right.
And in your relation, I was just thinking, he was, he had fought for the Luftwaffe. It's kind of embedded in his story personally as well as his work. And then he becomes, a sort of a German and a Scotsman. On one sense, decades earlier, the nations are at war, and then this kind of friendship and collaboration evolves over time. And that personal story seems to gel very much with that post-war spirit embedded in the original Edinburgh Art Festival and Documenta.
I'm asking myself now, what was it in my mind in 1968 when I actually saw Joseph Beuys at work in the Documenta, making his contribution to Documenta in the form of an extraordinary installation. I was in the company of the director of the the Stedelijk Museum, Eddie de Wilde, a man of great authority, power, to be the director of the Stedelijk. My goodness me, that was even more important than being the director of the Tate. He was with me. We were accompanied by the artists that I represented, who had just won the Venice Sculpture Prize, the Venice Biennale Sculpture Prize. I should have been happy. And it happened that the Venice Biennale coincided with the Documenta in 1968. We were lucky. Well, I think that experience of Beuys installing this amazing work was part of our whirlwind tour of the Documenta. So we were there conscious that we had to catch a train on our way to Stedelijk, the Stedelijk in Amsterdam. And I realized that the other two weren't completely poleaxed as I was. I didn't understand why, but I thought, my God, whatever's happening here is what I really want to know about. It's what I believe art is all about. Mm-hmm. I couldn't explain it. It was beyond rational thought. The American government wanted me to put on a big exhibition of American art in collaboration with the Museum of Modern Art in New York. That means I could bring to the Edinburgh Festival all the great artists, the most famous artists in the world, the ones who represented big bucks, the American New York art world, Warhol, Pollock, de Kooning, you name it. So on my return from my 3-week tour as the official guest of the American government, I was worried because I thought to myself, my God, I'm about to become part of something which I could well understand was an art world totally dominated by money. So there was a phone call that saved my life. Her name was Brigitte Blomeyer. And she said, Richard, I know you've just come back from New York. You're probably going to put on a big show of American art. But can I tell you something? I want you to be the guest of the West German government, because at that time Germany was split in two, right? It didn't exist. Germany didn't exist. Berlin was out of question. It was a great problem with Russia. But there was, she said, I want you to visit our capital, Bonn. But Bonn is part of a conurbation of three cities. It's within striking distance of Cologne and Dusseldorf. I want you to go to Dusseldorf. So there was a moment of truth. I knew, because I had met Günter Ucker, the great German avant-gardiste, at the first Rosk exhibition in Dublin. So it was Dublin that introduced me to the fact that Dusseldorf was a great city, because he said, I am an East German. I had to leave East Germany, and I have settled in Dusseldorf.
I always thought the catalyst for your interest in bringing the Dusseldorf artists to Edinburgh in strategic arts in 1970 was this meeting with Beuys. But the year before you met Beuys, you met Günter Ucker here in Dublin. So there's a
he told me something which I couldn't believe. He said, I love the Celtic world of Ireland. And so too did my brother-in-law. Brother-in-law? Who's that? Well, my brother-in-law was Yves Klein. And Yves Klein was my hero. I desperately wanted to bring Yves Klein to the Edinburgh Festival. But unfortunately, he died
too young.
Very young. In the year before, another hero of mine, Piero Manzoni, died. They both died more or less within a year. But I knew that there was someone who was obviously alive. And I realized that Günter Ucker came from Dusseldorf, and he told me that Dusseldorf was where many artists from abroad, from Romania, from the United States, even from England, had gathered. It was a city that I had to go to. So I said, it is the case, of course, that someone called Joseph Beuys lives there, and he has a studio there. Yeah, he's a friend of mine. Oh, really? Anyway, I said yes to Brigitte Lumayer on one condition, that I had to, as the guest of the West German government, I had to meet Joseph Beuys. And so I did.
That resulted in the Strategic at Arts exhibition, which is this fantastic large format catalogue, which is such a wonderful object in itself. So that took place at Edinburgh College of Art. But before the exhibition, Beuys visited Edinburgh.
I invited him along with I knew I had a friend, a good friend then in Dusseldorf. That was Günter Ucker, and his best friend in Dusseldorf, among his very good friends, was Gerhard Richter. And so the whole idea for Strategic at Arts was born in the studio of not Günter Ucker, but Gerhard Richter. Can you imagine? Two unknown artists, really. Nobody in Britain cared a damn about Günter Ucker or Gerhard Richter or Joseph Beuys. But I did meet Joseph Beuys, and I realized he was surrounded by friends, including the Van der Quinten brothers, his former friends and patrons. And I only had a few minutes of his company. And so what did I do? I brought with me in my pocket postcards. I think it was 20-something postcards of banal subjects. And I said to him, this is what the common people of Britain or Scotland know. Scotland. This is the reality of Scotland. And I showed him postcards of purple heather, Highland cattle, sunsets over the island of Skye. Oh yes, sheep and castles, so many castles. And after I showed him, he looked at them all very seriously, and then I said, what do you see, Professor Beuys? And he said, I see the land of Macbeth. Then I knew that he had respect for Shakespeare, but not just Shakespeare, the one play that is all about the impossible dialogue between human beings and the world of the spirit, the three witches. So I couldn't believe it. So I thinking of the text of Macbeth, I said, so when shall we two meet again? You know, the witches talk about when shall we two meet again. And his reply was proof that he knew all about Shakespeare. He said, in thunder, lightning, or in rain, when the hurry-burry's done, when the battle's lost and won.
And so you invited him to Scotland, but in fact, you told me before that you didn't so much invite him to Scotland, but you invited him to the Celtic world. And that's a theme, you know, throughout his work. But what does that mean? Obviously, it encompasses Scotland and Ireland, and that's a kind of a connection between the two places, both kind of historically and geographically. But what does that mean? And I guess as you pointed out, those kind of postcard images, the Celtic can also be configured as something that to kind of sell, you know, sell the landscape in terms of tourism. But what does that idea of the Celtic world mean to you, and what did it mean to Beuys?
Well, it so happens that my great-grandmother, my maternal great-grandmother, was an Irish woman, a Dubliner. Her name was Elizabeth McGuinness. Oh my God, I've got Irish blood running through my veins. I'm not just an Italian, a Roman. Demarco means Rome. Okay, I'm a Romano Celt. So therefore, I am part of the world of King Arthur and the Romanization of the British Isles. And of course, I later discovered that Beuys was enthralled by the mythical world of King Arthur and the Holy Grail. It's all part of that world in Germany, which is Wagnerian, you know, the Graal, okay? Mm-hmm. So we were not taught, I mean, you don't waste a second wasting your time talking about art to Joseph Beuys. You don't make that mistake. You don't say, come to Scotland and I'm going to give you an exhibition. No! You say, because not long afterwards, when I invited him to Scotland, he said, I'm not a German, I'm a Celt. I come from that part of Germany, which is an enclave. a Roman Catholic Celtic enclave around the city of Cleve, not far from Mönchengladbach. And Mönchengladbach means, in English, the place of the Celtic monks. On a hill in the center of Mönchengladbach, there used to be a Celtic monastery built in the 6th or 7th century. Now, of course, there is the beautiful new glossy Museum of Modern Art, because museums of modern art replace monasteries now in our world. They're everywhere, okay? And he said, basically, I'm a Germano-Celt. Even my name. And I said, yeah, I can see it. And obviously, I took him immediately away from my gallery. He was in my gallery for 10 minutes. And I said, Kevin, we must leave this place. It's not important. I want you to go into the world of the Scottish Enlightenment, which gave us the University of Edinburgh's world, which contained professors like who taught Charles Darwin. One of them was someone called James Hutton. James Hutton was the father of geology. And in the center of Edinburgh, there's a hill. There are 7 hills, sacred hills. And the one outstanding one is the hill of King Arthur. Oh my God. Oh my God. Let's go, Joseph, now to the hill of King Arthur, because there you will see an outcrop of volcanic rock, which is the stuff and substance of the world of Fingal, the mythical god of the Celts, who had a son called Ossian. And I realized that Beuys had studied Ossian, had read the poetry of Ossian, okay? I knew it was phony, but it didn't matter. The point is, he knew that he had to follow in the footsteps of another German called Felix Mendelssohn. Mendelssohn had created a very well-known popular piece of music called the Hebrides Overture. Da 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 dee 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 dee. Okay, Beuys said, well, I think this is too sentimental. And I was not at all surprised when he said, after I'd taken him to the world of the Celts, to the world of Macbeth, to the blasted heath, right into it, the moor of Ranach. And that was therefore necessary to go via what was the kingdom of Dalriada. And that's where the kings of Scotland and Ireland were crowned. It was the capital of Scotland and Ireland. And it's the world of the Celts and the language of the Gael, the Gaelic language. It was the alternative way of thinking to the classical Mediterranean Roman world of logical world that created our universities and our ideas of scientific investigation of reality. Beuys was the personification for me of the Celtic consciousness. And therefore, I have never been sentimental. I'm not someone who accepts the art world the way it is, because I don't think it's going anywhere. The madness the other day of discovering that someone had spent millions on an art object that doesn't exist, you know, which is a combination of sort of photographic images. It's not, I can't believe that I'm now living in a world that can happen. We've got to stop it. And we've got to take seriously the life of Joseph Beuys in this year, which should celebrate the 100th anniversary of his birth. Mm-hmm. By the way, could you realize I'm now in my 91st year? I realized from the moment I met him, I was of his generation. I was only 9 years behind him. And I can't believe I'm alive. And I think it's only a rumor that he's dead. He's not dead. He's alive. He's speaking to us. He's demanding certain things of us. And so, without being sentimental, I must emphasize the fact that Beuys cannot be understood fully unless you understand his willingness to be in the world of the Celts, his need to be in the world of the Celts, mm-hmm. and why he actually at one point wanted to have the Free International University headquarters in Derry, in a city riven by pain and suffering and madness. But the fact is, I knew when I met Jimmy Ball in 1973 that somehow or another the world of the special unit, which was an experiment in penal reform in the worst possible stinking horrible prison called Barlinnie in Glasgow, I knew that that was the world that I would inevitably have to bring Beuys to.
Mm-hmm. And that happened in 1974, wasn't it, as part of Edinburgh Arts, 1974. The blackboards that we have in our collection, which in a way are kind of generating the occasion to have this conversation, because we'll put them on show again as part of the centenary year. But he made those blackboards during the exhibition of the Secret Block for a Secret Person in Ireland, which took place here in 1974. And of course, that was organised by Carolyn Tisdall, who you had and then brought to Dublin by Oliver Dowling. But you'd introduced Beuys to Tisdall, I think the year before. So there's a sort of chain of connections. And he also made that exhibition opened in Oxford and toured to Dublin, Edinburgh, Belfast and London. The 1974 was also the year of the Coyote performance, I Like America and America Likes Me in New York. And then he was in Edinburgh for Edinburgh Arts. I think you showed the documentation from Coyote.
I put that exhibition on. It not only was an exhibition, her photographs I knew had to be shown in Edinburgh as part of my summer school. My Edinburgh Arts was inspired by Black Mountain College, you know, which was the spirit, which defended the spirit of the Bauhaus in America, on a farm in the Black Mountains of North Carolina. That's where John Cage and Buckminster Fuller and people had congregated, and Rauschenberg. And it was the world of education, because, you know, I don't believe in galleries. I believe in places of education where the language of the arts is taken seriously, and you don't just put on exhibitions of famous artists. Be very careful. Don't put on an artist when that artist has become famous. My job is to make sure that artists escape the business of becoming celebrities and become filthy, stinking rich. My job is to have a support system ready to help Joseph Beuys with his ideas before they are materialized. He was the one person who wanted to speak to me before it existed of the 7,000 oaks, 7,000 icon. But why? Because he knew the whole story of the Celtic world of the Druids and how St. Columba, oh, there's a name to conjure with. St. Columba. Where did St. Columba go from Derry? He crossed the Irish Sea to another part of Ireland, which was called Iona, an island of the coast of Mull. And there he encountered the Druids. The Druids were already in Derry, because you know what the word Derry means? Derry means the land of the Druids. Dr, dr, der, 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 der. There's an old sound of the word oak, the place of the oaks. Mm-hmm. He landed in Iona, and there were the Druids, and they planted their trees in a configuration of 7, because 7, according to the Fibonacci theory, is the way all things grow. And you measure time, the days of the week, 7 days, 7. The book of Genesis, the world, the universe was created in 7 stages. 7 stages.
And Beuys expands this to a much greater scale, to 7,000.
That's right. And the reason why it was 7,000, because I asked him, you must see, you must read my dialogue, my interview with Beuys. Because the only thing that really mattered to me was that he would make an artwork that would live and grow beyond his life. And where is it? It's in the middle of document. Right in the middle. Not in a park, but planted in relation to all the stuff that gives us electricity and gas and all that. It's because he knew, in our conversations were all about the fact that I was speaking to the co-founder of the Green Party. Mm-hmm. My God, an artist wasting his time in establishing something called the Green Party. It wasn't established in Ireland or Britain or America. It was established in Germany.
It's extraordinary looking at his work now, as you say, around planting trees, as we kind of face this global environmental crisis and crisis of energy. And yet he was, he made work using peat, coal, fossil fuels. And in 1974, of course, he spoke at the Black and White Oil Conference that you organized to address this issue of, I guess, the cultural and economic and environmental impact of the oil industry in Scotland. So, all these kind of issues that were being addressed in his work throughout the 70s and 80s are with us in even a more acute way now. They sort of used materials a lot in very kind of symbolic ways, felt, fat, peat, coal. How important were those particular materials and the symbolic power of those materials to him?
Well, the first art object, he made 11 major artworks in Scotland. They were made out of the stuff of Scotland. And the first artwork he made was called the Loch or Peace. It was because to get to to the world of the Moor of Rannoch, you had to go via Dalriada, and therefore the part of Scotland called Argyllshire. And on the shores of the great lake, Loch Awe, okay, he investigated the peat bogs that existed on the rim of the Loch. But the fact is, I knew that the Beuys was suffering. And, you know, he kept saying to me, show your wounds. Show your wounds. And I realized he was dying, really, in the process of dying, holding on to life. And the last time I heard his voice was when he phoned me, he telephoned me, and he said in 1986, 2 weeks before he died, I'm coming. Richard, I'm coming to Scotland again. Oh, good, Joseph. I want you to look at my new space, which is a converted church, and I want you to turn it into a work of art, just as you did for Rennie Block. You wrapped up all the walls, everything of Rennie Block's gallery, and you made it into a work of art. Will you do that? But also, we must talk about Adam Smith and what is meant by the wealth of nations. What is wealth? Wealth, when you say art equals, Kunst equals Kapital, you really mean art equals wealth. No, you don't. You really mean, Joseph, don't you? Art equals health, well-being, okay? But you have to admit that you're suffering from the human problem of dying. So anyway, he phoned me, and I knew he was very ill, but his voice was very strong, and I thought he was certainly going to come. And he spoke for 10 minutes, and then he said, Richard, I must go now. I hear this, I hear his voice. He said, Richard, I must go now. And the last words he spoke to me, it's outrageous. I hear ringing in my ears, Richard, I love you. What do you do? This is not organizing a show at the Tate or the Royal Academy or the National Gallery of Ireland. How do you reply to that? It leaves me with a big problem. I replied, Joseph, I love you. And that was how the conversation ended. And as I speak to you now, I'm thinking of that, and I'm thinking of why, when he said, show your wounds, I knew that I could say to him, Joseph, if you say that everyone is an artist, everyone is born to be creative. He meant by that, not everyone is going to be in the art world. He meant if you're a doctor or a policeman or a nurse or a farmer or a shoemaker, you must be creative. Mm-hmm. But he, I mean, I keep laughing at this. I said to him, Joseph, does that mean that everyone is an artist, no matter how old they are? If they are a child at school, primary school, secondary school, yeah. Does that include people who are unwell in hospital? Yeah. Does it mean people who are dying? Yeah. Does it mean people who are in prison? Yeah. Okay. Does it mean people who are serving life imprisonment for murderers. Yeah. Okay. You are not going to waste your time in a museum of art, a gallery of art. I want you to go to the special unit, because this was an experiment in penal reform taking place with 6 murderers and a team of nurses who were the guards, who were dealing with the psychiatric and physical problems, because these 6 murderers had been causing trouble in the prison in Inverness, stripping themselves naked, and they were put into cages inside their cells. It was a horror situation and about the collapse of our prison system. So he didn't go into my gallery on that particular occasion. He went to Berlin.
So these prisons had been moved from Inverness to Glasgow to Berlin, and this new unit was set up, which was pretty groundbreaking and
unbelievable,
courageous in making that mental shift, I guess, about how we.
Well, it was the idea of a wonderful man. I don't want him to be forgotten. He invited me to put on a play performed by people who had been on death row in San Quentin in California. A play directed by a man called Rick Cluchet, who befriended Samuel Beckett, an Irishman, a Celt. And Samuel Beckett helped to produce this play for the prisoners on death row. And the whole community of prisoners in San Quentin. And they well understood the meaning of Waiting for Godot. Perfect audience. So I want you to know that I presented the theatre company of Rick Cluchet in a prison, which was for young offenders. It's where you put young people and you prepare them through the prison system to become inmates of the serious prison. You were already making sure that they would never be really able to be part of society. I think this is a major problem. I want you to know that when I was the first person to be brought into Berlin, and I realized that the last thing that the prisoners needed was art therapy. They had to be given the chance to work with the most important artists imaginable. And the one artist I thought was outstandingly important for them was Joseph Beuys, especially when he made a point of becoming a friend of Jimmy Ball. And when Jimmy Ball met him first, he was serving life imprisonment, no hope. And the moment he met him was in a prison. I met him, I organized it for Jimmy Ball to meet Joseph Beuys inside a prison. On the one day that Jimmy Ball was released from prison after 17 years of imprisonment, the one day, released for one day, where he could have gone anywhere with his guards, 2 guards, he decided to come to the Demarco Gallery's prison, which was called Forest Hill Poorhouse. It was Bedlam. It was the medieval place for a hospital and prison. And it was there, with the exhibition on the wall of Caroline Tisdale's photographs, of Beuys's action, he called it an action, his conversation with the coyote. Jimmy had just seen that. So I brought Jimmy over and I said, come, Jimmy, now I want you to meet Joseph Beuys. And Jimmy's words were, hello, Joseph, I am the coyote. Because the coyote, according to the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture of America, was an animal to be despised. You threw stones at it, you shot it. But the coyote was the sacred animal of the American Indians. It was like the hare or the stag or all those animals that the Druids regarded as sacred manifestations of the other world. But the fact is, I am not dealing with Beuys as someone who is part of the world of visual art. I think he's bigger than that. I think he's to be considered alongside someone like Leonardo da Vinci. He's not a German artist. He belongs to. He is defending a condition which is very special for me, and which makes me feel at home whenever I'm in Dublin or Belfast or Donegal or on the Aran Islands. I've led many expeditions to these places to let people know. And I've tried to educate the Scots to say, you're not Scottish.
A number of your Edinburgh Arts journeys. So these were quite extraordinary sort of summer schools that took place annually, but didn't take place in a classroom, but in the landscape. And you journeyed across Europe, and you've journeyed throughout the island of Ireland with many artists, writers, people from different walks of life participating. And that kind of very expansive, I guess, idea about education seems very much in keeping with Beuys's own thinking about teaching and his Free International University that you've mentioned, that he and Heinrich Boll and others established, and they looked to Ireland to perhaps set up a permanent base. People like Dorothy Walker, advocated for that.
With Joseph Beuys, I think the clue to him is his drawings, his watercolors, his little things. And I asked people to stop paying attention to his actions, even his teaching art history to a dead hare. I love that. I love it. Or his engagement with a coyote. Okay. I don't want to dishonor him. And I don't want people to be confused. But I also want people to know, why did I introduce Professor Robert O'Driscoll and his dear wife, Tressa, the great friend of Sean O'Reilly. Both of them were introduced by me to the special unit, and that resulted in the great conference taking place with all the great Irish experts, Conor Cruise O'Brien and the family of Yeats, and all sorts of people at the University of Toronto, as they say. It was a 3-day international conference entitled The Celtic Consciousness. It's because Professor Robert O'Driscoll, the world authority on Yeats, in meeting Beuys, knew that he could not separate in his mind the soul of Beuys from the soul of Yeats. And so this great conference took place, not in Scotland, because Scotland is essentially well, it's become a kind of, put it this way, it's become the country of the Scottish Enlightenment. And I call it the Scottish Enlightenment. I call it the Scottish Endarkenment, because it darkened our thoughts on what Beuys asked us to concentrate on, which is the Celtic consciousness. The Celtic consciousness is all about Oscar Wilde, Samuel Beckett, and someone that Beuys loved, James Joyce. Why did Beuys add certain chapters to Joseph? And you know, I'm so upset that I end up having to attend conferences and sit in the audience listening to people who never met Beuys. Would have been scared widget being in the same room with them, because he was undermining their position within the art world, the cozy, well-defined art world that can ignore, if it wants, global warming. Beuys could not ignore it, nor could he ignore the role of the teacher. He said, you know, what is your art? And his answer was, my art is my teaching.
Mm-hmm. I just wondered this idea, looking to ancient histories and traditions and landscapes, to what extent does that enable, say in Beuys's work and in others, enable an emphasis on shared histories and shared stories as opposed to division, you know, as opposed to, say, you know, in the context as we've talked about it after the war, or in where there's sectarian division or other forms of division. It seems that's one thing that this idea of the Celtic world enables, a kind of a bringing people together.
Well, the Celtic culture can be found, to my amazement, in Poland, throughout the whole of Germany, and in particular in Austria, and in the whole of France. You know, Wales is called Le Pays de Galles, the country of the Gaels. Gaul is really France, Gaul. The Romanization of Gaul by Julius Caesar was a stupid idea. And all over the coastlines of Europe, the outer rim, the Atlantean rim, have to be joined up with where the Celts come from. The Celts come from the Mediterranean. They're newcomers to Ireland. And if you go to the Aran Islands, you go to a remarkable prehistoric fortress. And that's where the last battle, more or less, took place between the people, the original inhabitants of Ireland, and the Celts. And it's told in the mythology of the two Cahulan, you know, the two brothers fighting each other, two inhabitants of Ireland. But the fact is, I had to go there because I cannot separate the Aran Islands from the island of Arran, which is in Scotland. Everywhere I go, I see there are at least 600 place names all over the British Isles, which refer to the land of the Druids. You know, you know, Durham is one. Durham, a famous city. You probably find, you know, Sevenoaks in England. Every time I look at a place name, I think, is this evidence that at one time it was part of the Celtic consciousness? Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, as I speak, of Ted Hickey, the wonderful director of the Ulster Museum, who was my great friend. And Ted Hickey sang the song, well, sang the kind of songs that Beuys loved. And that one about Mullingar, the road to Mullingar, and Beuys loved it and kept saying to him, please sing it again and again. And I'm thinking, I can hear Ted Hickey. I'm thinking of the Italians who settled in Dublin, and my mother was born in Bangor, County Down. Her mother was a Dubliner. I feel completely at home in Ireland. And without the support of my Irish friends, I couldn't possibly have enabled the Demarco Gallery to endure the many problems it had to endure. I think this statement is very important by Charles Merrill, and I don't think you should forget him. He was the editor and publisher of the Arts in Ireland in 1975. And he says, along with the statement by Jimmy Ball, the role of the artists in our society today is to search for the unknown of our being and to present it as strongly and intensely as possible. The role of society is to repress new thought forms. The repression from society acts as a catalyst to instill in the artist necessary impetus and rage to carry out this search. Both creativity and destructive attitudes are necessary in the evolution of universal thought forms. I think, that's really what it's about. The exhibition is part of the battle which Beuys valiantly fought with every breath of his being. I've never made art with the idea that I want to make money out of it. I make art so that maybe I use it, any income, to further the careers of other artists. I have an instinct. I mean, Beuys loved other artists and cared about them, not only as his students, but he was always in a position to help other people. And I'll never forget when he created Celtic Kinlochranach, the Scottish Symphony, he had with him Johannes Stucken and other students who were his students, but also artists. He didn't come alone. He also came with his family. I insisted that he came with his children and his dear wife, Eva. And I'm thinking, it was Cecil, dear Cecil, that introduced me to the world of the Irish art world. Because I gave him an exhibition when I was running the Travers Gallery, and then I gave him an exhibition at the Demarco Gallery, and he alerted me to the fact that there was someone called Michael Scott who had many friends and had a dream that Dublin should be part of the international art world. And Michael Scott was a friend of all sorts of people. And so I led, I think my first Edinburgh Arts expedition was in 1967. No, the first Rosk.
Yeah, 67.
Yes, sir. I led a team of 24 Scottish souls, many of them artists, including Cordelia Oliver, the art critic of the Guardian. I led them to Dublin for the opening. And where did it take place? Well, there was no place big enough for the exhibition. It took place where they normally exhibited horses.
Yeah.
in the
RDS and the Royal Dublin Society.
Yeah. Yes, and also it identified contemporary art with prehistoric and Celtic art. So it was a classic example. I mean, I was totally inspired by it.
And I'd like to thank Richard for generously giving his time to share his recollections of working with Joseph Beuys in the Beuys centenary year.